Hey, friends! Just so you know, we enjoy the swear word and we rely on good old fashioned humor to get through some seriously dark subject matter. At no time do we intend any disrespect toward the victims or families of the victims in the cases we cover. Also, be sure to listen to the end for a few palate cleansing bloopers to reset your mindset. And with that, we thank you for listening and we hope you enjoy. Hey, friends! Welcome to Crime Will Tell. I'm Carrie,
And I'm Jamie.
and I'm switching it up this episode.
What are you doing? What's happening?
We've had some heavy cases we've buried ourselves in lately. So I wanted to cover a known but often forgotten survival story this case.
Okay.
A survival story of being buried alive.
Ah,
James,
yes.
in your opinion, what is the worst way to die?
I would say being burned alive.
You would rather drown than be burned alive.
I mean, I would not like any of those situations to happen, but yes, I think drowning would probably be a quicker relief of pain and scaredness. It all is giving me anxiety. I don't want to drown. I don't want to be buried alive. I don't want to suffocate. I don't want any of those things to happen. Why? Why?
Why am I asking? I can't land on. As I was writing this, I'm like, God, what a harrowing experience. And I'm like, what's the worst way to die? I'm like, I can't land on like one thing. There are so many that I absolutely would never ever want to experience. Being buried alive certainly tops the list.
Right? It's right up there.
Drowning tops my
Mhm.
list. Being burned alive, just like you said, tops my list. Being mauled alive,
Hmm.
anything painful alive that results in death. I don't want anything to do. The fucking zombie apocalypse, which I didn't think was any realm of reality to that until I started watching The Last of Us. I need a drink
Okay.
of my tasty Jameson Black Barrel
Ooh,
whiskey. Still don't know the
fancy.
difference between whiskey and bourbon, but it's whiskey. What are you
Nice.
drinking?
Changing it up. I am drinking, it's called Keeper's Heart.
Mm.
It's a blend of Irish whiskeys and bourbon, and it's pretty tasty. I like it.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah.
cheers, my friend.
Cheers to you. Clink.
Clink.
And hey, before we get started on this episode, if you don't mind, I've got a really quick update on
Mm.
the Michelle Harris case that we covered.
Oh, okay.
This was courtesy of my mother-in-law, Deb, who
Hey,
lives in the
Deb.
area that this that this case took place in. She was like, "Have you seen the updates?" and sent me a link today, and I was like, "Oh, I had not." This was episode 12 that we covered on the Michelle Harris case. And just like a real quick recap, in like right after 9/11, the 9/11, Michelle Harris went missing from her home, was never seen again. Her husband Cal was charged in her murder, and he had 4 trials
That's
and
right.
ended up being found not guilty in the 4th trial. But the big announcement today was that he is offering a $100,000 reward for any information that leads to the recovery of Michelle's remains. He said, regardless of anyone being prosecuted for her death, like they basically are just wanting to find where she is. In 2017, he filed a lawsuit claiming malicious prosecution and civil rights violations in his trials. So that lawsuit actually kind of started a whole new investigation and a lot of digging back into the case. So, like, through the discovery process for this new trial and this case, they've dug up some information that they're hoping that with this reward that they're going to be able to finally figure out what happened to her and maybe where her remains are.
Oh,
So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. But
fingers crossed.
people like money. And so maybe people will come forward and have some information. But I just wanted to share that. So I'm hoping that it gets that information for them and they can at least bring her home and lay her to rest officially.
It's by Michelle Harris. So, this case that we're going to dive into today was a request from a colleague of mine, Scott Verner. Hey, Scott.
Hey, Scott.
And it is about the 1968 kidnapping and survival of Barbara Jane Mackle. Have you heard of
Okay.
this case?
No, I don't think so.
It's fucking wild. Thank you for waiting, Scott, but this one is for you. So, we're traveling back in time, like I said, to 1968, specifically December 1968, to the Atlanta area of the state of Georgia here in the United States. And we're going to start with the box that was dropped into a crudely dug hole in a very remote area in Gwinnett County, Georgia.
Okay.
Gwinnett County is just to the northeast of Atlanta. It's kind of a mind fuck when you look at a map, because you look at a map and you see Georgia and you see Atlanta in Georgia, and we know Atlanta is a big, huge major metropolitan city. And then just bloop, to the north and the east is Gwinnett County. It's like right there. And it's hard to believe or think that there are remote enough areas right outside of Atlanta where somebody could dig a hole in the ground 6 feet down, big enough for a coffin, and not get caught for days. It's kind of a mind fuck.
I mean, I do it all the time, but whatever.
This box was specifically constructed to incite terror. According to the book, The Talented Dr. Christ, written by Steve Fennessy, it took weeks for this box to be created. It was made of, quote, 3 layers of 1/4-inch plywood and wrapped in fiberglass cloth. One end of the 8-foot-long box, partitioned off from the main compartment, contained a 12-volt, nope, not a 12-volt,
That's
a
a
12
jury.
volt. That's a jury. A 12-volt motor. It contained a 12-volt motor to power the fan that would keep the victim from suffocating, as well as a pump that would drain the box in case it flooded with water.
What the fuck?
Even if the motor failed, it was reasoned there would be enough air movement through the intake and exhaust hoses leading above ground that the occupant could breathe on their own without a fan.
That is.
It was said, quote, an intelligent person could not suffocate in the capsule.
Oh.
Highly false,
But if you're a dumbass,
you're dead in 20. This capsule, its intended tenant was Barbara Jane Mackle, who, unaware that she was hurtling toward the most excruciating experience of her life, was being stalked by a man named Gary Stephen Christ. Christ had been on the hunt for a young, wealthy woman who had the disposition to withstand being buried alive. He was looking for a very specific type of woman, all for the purpose of extorting hundreds of thousands of dollars out of the woman's family. He had heard of the Mackle family, hard not to, with how well known they were in Florida, and learned of 20-year-old Barbara's existence. And he began researching her and the Mackle family members and decided she's the ideal victim. This is who I want. It's Barbara Jane Mackle. Wow. So let's get to know a little bit about Mr. Christ. Gary Stephen Christ was born April 29th, 1945 in Aberdeen, Washington, to mom Eileen and dad James, but he grew up in Alaska in a really small fucking town called Pelican. Kind of cute. Oh. As of the 2020 census, Pelican boasted a whopping 98 residents. When I say small, I mean like smaller than the head of a pencil.
Yeah.
Small. It was a fishing village accessible only by boat or plane.
Ah, okay.
And Pelican, this island, is situated about 80 miles north of Sitka. Sitka is a pretty well-known town in Alaska. I've had the opportunity and pleasure of having visited Sitka. It is stunningly beautiful. Often, Gary and his older brother, Gordon, were watched over by friends of their parents while their parents were away because their parents were fishermen. And so for
Ah,
many
okay.
months of the year during
Yeah.
fishing season, they were gone, living the life of fishing people and doing that. Really, it's a hard life. But as a consequence, Gary and Gordon were left with family friends to be looked after. And they were looked after. It's not like they were, abused or anything like that, though their upbringing was more of neglect than anything
Mm,
because their parents were gone so much. It wasn't like it was intentional neglect, but it was neglect nonetheless. And even when her
right.
parents
Yeah.
were home, they didn't really spend a lot of time with the boys. So
Gotcha. Hmm.
by the time he was 14 years old, Gary was an old hat at committing petty thefts. His method was stealing. He would literally steal anything, even things that had no value for him. Just the challenge of stealing it was what he craved. And soon, petty theft was kind of like, you need more. So he leveled up and he started stealing cars. And you know what, Gary? Go big or go home. So if you're going to steal,
Right.
you might as well do grand theft. Might as well. Well, he went big and he got caught and was sentenced to spend time in a juvenile detention facility in Ogden, Utah. So he was in Alaska. He was fucking around. He found out and he got sent to a juvenile detention facility in Ogden, Utah. And he was in Ogden, Utah for about a year. And during that time, he managed to escape and steal a car, but was soon recaptured after. This won't be his first escaped attempt.
Oh, awesome.
After he was released, he went back to Alaska, this time to Sitka, to attend high school, where he
Jesus, all this
actually
before high school. That's
thrived.
crazy.
Yeah, all of this was before high school. So he went back to
Wow.
Sitka and he went to high school and he actually thrived.
Hmm.
And after graduating from high school, he actually went back to Ogden, Utah, and set his sights on going to the University of Utah to pursue a medical degree.
Wow.
He
What a
wanted to become a
turn.
doctor. Yeah. Unfortunately, he got in his own way. Didn't really turn
Gary.
out that way.
God
Yeah.
damn it.
Right before classes were supposed to start in August of 1963, Chris decided to peace out by stealing a car and heading to Oakland, California. By doing this, what that meant was that the baby he was expecting with this girl that he was dating wasn't important enough for him to stick around and play daddy.
Mm.
Within a week of being in California, he was arrested and sent to a state jail for juvenile offenders after stealing and wrecking a car. So not only was he not good at not wrecking cars, he was not good at not getting caught. It was during this lockup that the idea to extort ransom money by kidnapping a wealthy person was born. He was literally sitting in front of his metal plate at Chow Hall in his prison uniform, going, what would be a really awesome idea? Let's kidnap someone rich and make a ton of money off of it. Boom. He was like, look, kidnappings and ransoms always fail because they don't plan properly. And so he set out to plan a kidnapping, which meant Chris had started planning the kidnapping of someone 5 fucking years before he actually kidnapped Barbara.
Damn.
He started planning this in 1963. He kidnapped Barbara in 1968. What he reasoned was he didn't want to kidnap a kid. Kids are too much of a hassle. Preach it, Gary.
You want a lady nap, not kidnap.
Not kidnap, lady nap. He didn't want a man nap either because they could defend themselves. Men were stronger.
Right.
They could
True.
defend themselves. They could potentially overpower him. So a female it was, but a very specific type of female, not too weak of a female because he needed her to stay alive long enough to get the ransom money, but not too strong that she couldn't be overpowered. So weak in physical stature, but strong mentally, like
Wow.
most women, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to say most women are weak, but in physical stature. But what I'm saying is just biologically, men are stronger. So this is how he landed on a woman. Okay. He played the long con and he bided his time until the perfect opportunity came along. He didn't even know Barbara Mackle existed yet. With his detailed planning to pull off this perfect ransom heist, he unknowingly sealed her fate.
Mm.
At the end of 1964, Christ was paroled and headed out to Palo Alto, California, where his brother Gordon was enrolled at Stanford University. So Gordon wasn't a dummy. Gary wasn't a dummy either. These kids were
Right.
smart kids. But not long after, so Chris arrived out in Palo Alto around December 1964. Fast forward a few weeks. In March of 1965, he married a woman he had met at a local roller rink by the name of Carmen Simon. So now he's
Oh
married.
my
When you know, you know.
gosh. Couple skate. Wow.
But before the month was up, he was arrested and jailed again for stealing a car. He was basically obsessed with stealing cars.
Just roller skate places, Gary. God damn it.
By March 1966, his first wedding anniversary is coming around. He celebrated by starting a 5-year sentence for drug trafficking. Just kidding. He stole another goddamn car. And he started serving that 5-year sentence at Duell Vocational Institute in Tracy, California. I think it's Duell. If anybody knows this vocational, I like how they call it a vocational institute. It's straight up fucking prison in Tracy, California, which is in theoretical commuting distance of the Bay Area out there in California.
Okay.
I think it's Duell. Anyway, so he started a 5-year sentence around his 1-year wedding anniversary in 1966. He missed the birth of his first child, a son named Vinny.
Would this actually be his second child, though?
Yeah, you're right. It would be. There is nothing about that other child. There is nothing.
Hmm.
I don't know if the pregnant girlfriend was pregnant when he met her. I don't know if the child is his and he just was a
Bailed.
deadbeat. Yeah, I don't know.
Mm.
But his first child that he was involved with, shall we say, was a son named Vinny. He missed the birth because he was serving time. And so he was like, yeah, I love my wife so much. I love my newborn son so much. I can't bear to be away from them. I think it's time to hop a fence and secure early release 8 months after starting his sentence.
Oh my God.
So he escaped from prison. He took Carmen and Vinny and they fled to Boston, Massachusetts, clear on the other side of the United States, pretty far away from Tracy, California. Unfortunately, during the escape from the Vocational Institute, the dude he escaped with was shot and killed by prison guards, but Gary managed to get away unharmed. And at the time, I'm not sure if this is still a law in the books in the state of California, but at the time, there was a law in the books that allowed for the death penalty when an escape led to someone's death.
Oh,
So
wow.
Chris was kind of freaking out. He's like, now I got to be on the run forever as a fugitive because if they catch me, they're going to fry me. Because this
Right.
dude that I escaped with that I don't even really fucking know, he was just an inmate with me, was killed during the escape. So there's that. So then he's like, you know what? It's time to level up again. And he began to do things to disguise himself. First, he took an alias by the name of George Deacon.
Oh my.
Very
Well.
upstanding 1940 Southern name, if you ask me.
Right.
And he grew a beard.
Mm.
Major
That'll do
disguise
it.
here. Major disguise, people. He and Carmen got themselves a nice little home in a trailer park in Norton, Massachusetts. Norton, Massachusetts is about just under a 90-minute drive southwest from Boston.
Wow, they are just all over the place.
Yeah, greater Boston area. They welcomed another son. They named Adam. So now they have 2 sons, Vinny and Adam. And through a want ad, Chris was able to land a job as a research assistant at MIT.
Are you serious? God damn.
For those of you that don't know, MIT is Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and it is a very well-respected, very high-caliber university here in the United States. I mean, it is, you
basically are a genius to go there.
You're a genius to go there. You're a genius to work there. They were paying him $7,500 a year as a research assistant, which in today's dollars is $74,500 a year. That is really good
Nice.
fucking money. And this is
Yeah.
where Christ's intelligence was noticed because he was a fast learner, like real fast, like shockingly fast. According to the book, The Talented Dr. Christ, a scientist at MIT by the name of Henry Colm still remembered 40 years later how Christ, Colm knew him as George Deacon, but Christ was, quote, one of the brightest lab technicians he'd ever worked with, especially considering his lack of formal training. Christ's job as a research assistant was basic. He was responsible for operating the machinery, the like research and testing machinery, maintaining the solenoids, and monitoring the water pumps at MIT's National Magnet Laboratory.
Mm,
Henry
okay.
Colm was a scientist who was, quote, doing pioneering work on the technology that led to magnetically levitated high speed trains.
Oh my.
So,
That's pretty cool.
all those trains that you see at like airports that
Yeah.
are, they're the magnetic, that's what they were working on.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. And it would seem through all accounts that Christ and Colm had a really good working relationship. In fact, Christ would often just chat with Colm about anything and everything. You
Hmm.
know, he would tell Colm about his sons and his wife and, his past experience, doing something that probably wasn't true as George Deacon. Okay. So
Of course.
Colm thought he was an upstanding dude. Small rabbit hole. I bet you want to know what solenoids are. I bet I said he was in charge of maintaining the solenoids, and you were like, what are solenoids? No?
Well, I went to MIT, so I know. But
I did it. I didn't. So I needed to look it up. So a small rabbit hole here because I had no idea what solenoids were. I had never even heard the word. I think I'm pronouncing it right. They're pretty cool. According to my best bud, Microsoft Copilot,
congrats, by the way.
thanks.
Hmm.
A solenoid is a type of electromagnet that generates a controlled magnetic field when an electric current is passed through it. It is a device that converts electrical energy to mechanical energy using an electromagnet formed from a coil of wire. The device creates a magnetic field from electric current and uses that magnetic field to create linear motion.
Okay.
A solenoid consists of like a coil of wire, typically wound around a cylindrical or elongated core. Then you have all of these, and then they work together when you pass electric currents through it.
Wow.
Levitates
Okay.
and moves. So that's a
Nice.
solenoid. It's pretty fucking cool. But of course, you knew that because, you went to
Right.
MIT.
I mean, yeah. Yeah.
For about a year and a half, Christ lived a crime free life, a pretty
Wow.
conventional, traditional life. But as time marched on, he began to feel uneasy staying in one place for so long. So by this time, he had been working at MIT for a year and a half. He'd been living in Norton, Massachusetts in his home for a year and a half. And he wasn't a scientist, he was only playing one. And he decided it was time to move on. Ironically, through his buddy, Henry Colm, he learned of an opening at the University of Miami for a technician role. He applied for it and got it. Here's a funny thing. His MIT coworkers threw him a going away party and gifted him a beer stein with the name George Deacon engraved on it. I bet all these years later, when all this shit came out, they were probably like minds blown. Like, oh my God, wasn't that the George Deacon guy that we worked with?
Yeah. Oh, George.
Georgie.
What?
Okay, so now it's September 1968. Christ is only 23 years old. All of this
Whoa.
has happened, and he is still a baby.
Jesus.
And he is now working at the University of Miami as a technician. He joined the crew on a sailboat to Bermuda for a marine expedition. The sailboat's name was Pillsbury, which I think is kind of funny. His job as technician was to maintain the research and testing equipment on the ship. That was his job.
Cool.
This is where he met his future crime companion, 25-year-old University of Miami graduate student Ruth Eisman Shire. It could also be Ruth Eisman Shear. It could also be Ruth Eisman Scher. I worked really hard to find the correct pronunciation of Sheer, and I got all of those options. So I'm going to go with Sheer.
Okay. I support
Mhm.
you.
Thank you. I appreciate your
Welcome.
support. If anybody knows how to pronounce that, that would be great. Let me know because I really want to know. Maybe it can be pronounced all three different ways. You never know.
I
Yes.
mean,
Ruth was born in Honduras, but she was actually of German or Austrian descent. There's conflicting reports in the source material as to whether or not she was of German descent or Austrian descent. It could have been both. It could have been none. It's one of those two. So she actually wasn't Honduran. And if you look at her, she's Caucasian. So, but she
okay.
would just happen to be born in Honduras. Within days of setting sail to Bermuda on this marine expedition, Chris and Ruth were boinking in a full on
Mm,
sex affair. Like
gross. On a
straight up.
sailboat.
Yeah, on a sailboat. If you time it right.
Once that Dramamine kicks in, bam!
Apparently, Christ was so taken with Ruth that he divulged everything to her: his real name, his real identity, his past crimes, everything. When the ship returned to the States in early October 1968, so it was only gone for a few weeks, Chris decided to leave Carmen,
Aw.
abandon his boys Vinny and Adam, and with Ruth, they put the finishing touches on Chris's 5-year plan to kidnap someone rich to get a ransom.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
And that's how they landed on Barbara Jane Mackle being the lucky someone. Their plan was simple, James. It was simple. Kidnap Barbara Jane Mackle, bury her in a homemade box, ransom her, and run away together to Australia, where they would outfit a research vessel and he would compile a world encyclopedia of oceanography. That was the plan. Simple. Nothing could
Yeah.
possibly go wrong. Chris later
No.
said, quote, "Such an endeavor would employ me for the rest of my life."
Yeah, so would staying at MIT, you dummy.
You don't like his plan? Seems pretty simple to me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I am just like an underachiever that I would have been like, or we could just stay on a beach somewhere for the rest of our lives instead of me doing all this research and changing the world.
Yeah, I'm with you, staying on a beach.
Right?
So that's a little bit about Gary, Stephen Christ, his crime companion, Ruth. She'll come back up later because, again, she's his crime companion. Let's get into a little bit about Barbara, and then we'll talk about how their paths converge.
Okay.
So, Barbara was born on October 19th, 1948, to Robert and Jane Mackle in Coral Gables, Florida, and joined her brother Robert Jr., who was 4 years old at the time of her birth. Barbara's mother, Mary Jane Brasnell, was born October 26th, 1917, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and had moved to Miami, Florida when she was about 15 years old, where she eventually met and married Robert Mackle in a military wedding on November 27th, 1943. Her family, Jane's, this is Barbara's mom, was wealthy in their own right, owning several coal mines as well as a hotel property. Jane studied at Duke University and graduated with a degree in economics before she ever married Robert. So back in the day, I just love the women that prioritized education. Do you know
Right,
what I
me too.
mean?
I think that's awesome.
She also worked for the FBI during the Second World War, but after marrying Robert Mackle, she spent the rest of her life as a philanthropist and an activist. And she was involved in many groups and organizations designed to improve communities, raise awareness, give back to the poor or the needy. Think the American Cancer Society, the March of Dimes, volunteer organizations like those.
Okay.
But Jane could also kick your fucking ass in a bridge game any day of the week.
Nice.
Don't challenge her. She'll win. By all accounts, Jane Mackle was a lovely lady. Lovely lady. Robert Sr., Jane's eventual husband and Barbara's father, was born November 3rd, 1911 in Atlanta, Georgia. He served in the Navy and eventually, along with his two brothers, took over their father's company. His father, Frank Mackle Sr., started a real estate and development company in 1910 and helmed this company, growing it, nurturing it until eventually he retired and stepped back, leaving his three sons to fully run the company by 1945.
Okay.
This was Robert, Barbara's father, the oldest, followed by the middle son, Elliot, and then the youngest son, Frank Jr. So the three
Okay.
Mackle boys started running their dad's company by 1945. And the brothers worked hard to continue the success of the company that their father built. And by 1954, 9 years later, their company was the largest home developer in the state of Florida.
Oh, wow.
Here's a fun fact. In 1962, the Mackle brothers started the Deltona Corporation. The Deltona Corporation is a residential real estate development company focused on developing whole subdivisions of housing communities. So think the entire, instead of just like a subdivision by a developer and then a bunch of builders come in and, they developed the entire subdivision and built the entire subdivision. Their first development, Deltona, is now the city of Deltona in
Oh,
Florida.
wow. Okay.
So these weren't like
What a
just like
success. Yeah.
onesie twosies. Yeah. According to Dun and Bradstreet, in 1992, investors from Europe acquired a controlling interest in the company, led by CEO Anthony Graham, who eventually took the company private in 2004. So by about 1992, the Mackles kind of sold off their controlling majority and stepped back from controlling or running the business, if you will.
Okay.
Barbara lived the life of luxury. She went to private parochial schools. She vacationed in the lap of luxury, and often she had the best money could buy. Essentially, Barbara and her family were local celebrities. If they went to a play, there were write ups about their attendance in the local newspapers the next day, what they were wearing, where they sat, who they talked to. If she had a birthday, that was news. All about what she was wearing, who was invited, how did she celebrate. She and her brother Robert Jr. would frequently vacation with their mother Jane at their vacation home in Hendersonville, North Carolina, not South Carolina, North Carolina. Robert Sr. would oftentimes stay behind for work, but he would just kind of go back and forth too. And yet, Barbara was a wonderful human. She wasn't snooty. She wasn't stuck up. She wasn't hoity toity. She wasn't greedy. She was smart, industrious, cheerful was an adjective that we use a lot in the source material to
Aw.
describe how she was. She didn't really give her parents much trouble. She grew up in a Catholic home. They were practicing Catholics, and she regularly attended church with her family. They had a church that they went to in Coral Gables. In 1966, after graduating high school, she began her studies at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. And for the next 2 years, she was living her best life, dating her boyfriend, Stuart Hunt Woodward. The whole family adored Stuart. She was slaying it at school. She was having fun with friends. She was doing things she enjoyed. She was a 20-year-old, just her whole world out in front of her. In her third year at Emory University in December 1968, the Hong Kong flu swept through the campus, striking
Ooh.
down thousands of staff and students. This flu had first been reported on July 13th, 1968, in Hong Kong. It was a bird flu strain called H3N2, and it was virulent and it didn't discriminate against who it attacked. A lot of people got sick. By December, the strain had traversed the oceans and was sweeping across the United States, and it was considered a pandemic. The risk of death, though, was very, very low. It wasn't the same kind of pandemic that we went through for COVID. It just everybody got sick, and it sucks because you had the flu for a couple of weeks, but then you started to feel better. Well, Barbara caught the virus, and she became pretty sick with the flu in early December 1968. Classes were starting to wind down for the semester ahead of the Christmas break that was looming. But because she was so ill, Mama Jane decided to travel to Atlanta, Georgia from Coral Gables to take care of her baby Barbara while she
Aw, Mama
recovered.
Jane.
Because basically Barbara was like just holed up in her dorm room because she felt like
Mm.
fucking ass.
And you
We've
always
all,
want your mom when you're sick.
yeah, you definitely always want. Even just like stroking your hair, it's just so
Yeah.
comforting. Jane secured a room at the Roadway Inn, a motel close to Emory University, and eventually convinced Barbara to stay with her at the hotel. Actually, it wasn't a hotel, it was a motel, at the motel, so that she could better take care of her. As soon as Barbara felt well enough, the plan was that they were going to head down to their home in Coral Gables, Florida for the Christmas break. So that was the plan.
Okay.
Meanwhile, Christ and Ruth finished construction on the box in Miami, willingly got rid of everything they owned, and after loading up their car with this crazy fucking box, drove to the outskirts of Atlanta and spent an entire day digging the hole their box would be dropped into. Christ then set out to find Barbara's whereabouts, which was very easy in 1968. He simply called Emory University's admissions office and, after spewing some cockamamie story, learned which dorm building and dorm room Barbara lived in.
Yikes.
Barbara's dorm mate, when approached by Christ looking for Barbara, unknowingly aided in his plan to abduct her by telling her, "Oh, yeah, no, she's staying with her mom at the Roadway Inn. Yeah, that motel over there. Yeah, she's sick, so she's convalescing over there." So Christ and Ruth began staking out the motel, watching for Barbara and Jane, and through their surveillance, learned that they were staying in room 137. I love the look on your face.
I'm already panicking because, I mean, the thought of being put into a box is awful, but when you're sick, the thought of being
I
confined.
love that you are recognizing that this is horrifying as it is, but it's a million times worse because the girl has a fucking flu.
Yeah, she's probably got a
Yes.
fever, just aches, and I'm just like, oh, god damn. I mean, that's
Yes.
one way to quarantine, but fuck.
That's an aggressive quarantining.
Yeah.
Yes, she had all of the flu symptoms, the chills, the fever, the
Ah.
body aches and pains, the nausea, the sore throat. Like, she had it all. That flu was rough. Right. In the early morning hours of Tuesday, December 17th, 1968, there was a loud knock on their motel room door, waking both Jane and Barbara. Jane got up, and through the peephole and through the door, she could see two police officers. Through the closed door, they told her that there had been a serious car accident involving a white Ford, which sounded like the kind of car that Barbara's boyfriend, Stuart Hunt Woodward, drove. Thinking Stuart might be involved in an accident and hurt, Jane removed the door chain, and as she started to open the door, the two police officers rushed in, pointed a gun at Jane, and quickly locked the room door behind them. Then they wasted no time tying up Jane and Barbara, hands and feet, and then they put a piece of cloth against Jane's face that had chloroform in it and knocked her out.
Mm.
Turning the gun on Barbara, they forced her out of the motel room and pushed her into a running car parked in the parking lot, a blue Volvo station wagon. They then drove about 32 miles or 52 kilometers to the remote area in Gwinnett County where they had dug the hole and installed the box.
Mm. This all gives me serious anxiety.
I know.
I don't like it.
This one I had to put down a lot because when we write the stories and we research these cases, we try to put ourselves in the victim's shoes. It's impossible to do so, but you try, right? And I just kept getting worked up.
Mm-hmm. It's like when you watch a movie or a TV show and somebody's drowning or stuck in something. I'm like, oh God.
Yeah. Yeah. They forced Barbara out of the blue Volvo and, prodding her with the gun, forced her to walk over to the open box that was waiting for her. In Barbara's own words from the book she wrote in 1971 about her experience called 83 Hours Till Dawn, she said, quote, "He sort of sat me up on the ground. My feet were dangling over the side into a hole or something. I want you to slide down in there," he said, and he was pressing down on my shoulders. Up until then, I thought it was a room, certainly a place big enough to stand up and walk around in. He put me down and he said, "Now straighten out." For the first time I could actually see, there was a light in there. I knew instantly this wasn't a passageway. It was a box. I was shaking. I was terrified. I was never so frightened in my life. I guess I became hysterical. I cried, "No, no, no, you can't do this to me." And very calmly, the man stood there and said, "Don't be such a baby." Suddenly, the top came down. It made a heavy thud. I can hear him screwing in the screws in the lid. Then I heard the dirt. I heard it falling. There are no words to describe it.
Oh my God. I'm having palpitations.
The space in this box where Barbara was shoved into was about 2 feet wide by 2 feet tall by less than 7 feet long because a portion of the length was taken up by that 12-volt generator thing.
It's like a permanent MRI.
Exactly. She had extremely little room to maneuver about. Before Chris dropped the lid and screwed it in place, he forced Barbara to hold a sign with a handwritten word on it, "Kidnapped." It's a very famous picture associated with her case. While he took a Polaroid photos of her, he took multiple Polaroid photos of her holding this kidnap sign laying in the box. And in this picture, she's smiling. And one might be like, why is she smiling? She's being kidnapped and
Yeah.
about to be buried alive. She was so concerned about how her family was taking all of this that she smiled so that when they saw the photo, they would know that she wasn't hurt. That
Mm.
was the kind of woman Barbara was. Believing that she could possibly die, she was still more worried about how her parents were handling the situation.
Mm.
As she took stock of her surroundings, Barbara read the long note Chris had given her using the dim light of a bulb that he had installed in the box. So he ran electricity out to this, like, this box is bonkers. Here's what this note said. Stay with me. It's long. Chris is verbose.
Oh, Lord.
Do not be alarmed. You are safe. You are presently inside a fiberglass reinforced plywood capsule buried beneath the ground near the house in which your kidnappers are staying. Your status will be checked approximately every 2 hours. The capsule is quite strong. You will not be able to break it open. Be advised, however, that you are beneath the water table. If you break open a seam, you would drown before we could dig you out. The capsule instrumentation contains a water sensitive switch, which will warn us if the water enters the capsule to a dangerous degree. Your life depends on the air delivered to your chamber via the ventilation fan. This fan is powered by a lead acid storage battery capable of supplying the fan motor with power for 270 hours. However, the use of the light and other systems for only a few hours, coupled with the higher amperage drain, will reduce this figure to only 1 week of safety. Should the air supplied prove to be too much, you can partly block the air outlet with a piece of paper. A muffler has been placed in the air passage to prevent any noise you make from reaching the surface. If we detect any commotion which we feel is dangerous, we will introduce ether to the air intake and put you to sleep. The fan operates
Oh.
on 6 volts. It has a switch with 2 positions to switch between the 2 available circuits. Should one circuit fail, turn to the other. The box has a pump which will evacuate any accidental leakage from the box when you turn the pump switch onto the on position. This pump uses 15 times as much power as your ventilation fan, 7.5 amps. Your life support battery will not allow use of the pump except for emergency water evacuation. The light uses 2.5 times the amperage of the air circulation system. Use of the light when not necessary will cut your battery safety margin substantially. If you use the light continuously, your life expectancy will be cut to 1/3 of the week we have allotted you before you are released. Your capsule contains a water jug with 3 gallons of water and a tube from which to drink it. Be careful to blow the water from the tube when you are finished drinking to avoid siphoning the water onto the floor when the tube end drops below the water level. Isn't this fucking bananas?
Yeah, I would be
It's
like,
so
what?
specific and like weird.
What?
Your capsule contains a bucket for refuse and the products of your bowel movements. The bucket has an antibacterial solution in it. Don't tip it over. The lid seals tightly to prevent the escape of odors. A roll of wax paper is provided. Use it to prevent solid waste from contaminating your bed.
Okay, I'm sorry. How are you supposed to poop when you're laying down and you have only 2 feet to move? How are you supposed to get yourself over
Oh,
a
that
bucket?
we're gonna
Okay,
get
okay.
to that.
I'm panicking. I'm panicking.
Kotex is provided should you need it. So if you happen to start your period while you're in this box, thank God you have provisions. Blankets and a mat are provided. Your warmth depends on body heat, so regulate the air to prevent loss of heat from the capsule. A case of candy is provided to furnish energy to your body. Tranquilizers are provided to aid you in sleeping, the best way you have to pass the time. The ventilation system is doubly screened to prevent insects or animals from entering the capsule area. You risk being eaten by ants should you break these protection screens. The electrical components behind these screens are delicate and they support your life. Don't attempt to touch these circuits.
Oh
We're
my
sure your father
God.
will pay the ransom we have asked in less than 1 week. When your father pays the ransom, we will tell him where you are and he'll come for you. Should he fail to pay, we will release you, so be calm and rest. You'll be home for Christmas one way or the other.
Wow, but here's a million other ways you could die. So don't fuck this up. Wow. That is nuts.
Holy shit. After I read that, I tried to imagine how I might respond if I found myself in a situation like this. I don't know if I would be a crying, sniveling baby, if I would just give up, if I would try to drink the water full of tranquilizers and go to sleep forever, if I would cling to any thread of hope, real or I don't, the whole situation is just fucking bonkers. And I just don't even know how I would respond to
Yeah.
something like this. I
Yikes.
hope I never, anyway.
Well, I hope you don't either.
As you can imagine, once Chris screwed that lid tight and buried Barbara, she freaked out. She started
Yeah.
screaming with everything in her lungs. She pounded on the underside of the lid and the sidewalls, hoping someone would hear her. That light Chris left for her, it died after 3 hours and never came back on.
Ugh.
After which, she was plunged into the darkest of darkness there is for hours and hours and days. Pitch darkness. You cannot even see your hand in front of your face. How are you supposed to not make a mess?
Yeah, and how are you supposed to reference like the 9,000 directions that he just gave you? How are you supposed to reference that sheet?
Yeah, you can't see it anymore. You don't know if you accidentally kick something. So, like you were saying, a bucket that cannot be tipped. You're in a two by
Yeah.
2x7. You can't move. With the female anatomy designed as it is, how in the fuck was she supposed to relieve herself without making a damn mess?
Like, don't tip the bucket. How is there any other way?
Like, how was she supposed to lift up, put the wax paper underneath, take a shit, clean herself off, roll up the wax paper, shove it in the bucket? I don't know.
It's like a shit cookie on parchment paper that you're supposed to just magically wad up and put in a bucket. Like, come on, man.
So, phase one of their fucked up plan was complete. They captured Barbara, they buried her alive. Now it was time to initiate phase two, demand 500,000 fucking dollars from Barbara's father in exchange for her safe return. Fun fact, $500,000 in 1968 is worth about 4.6 million big ones in 2025.
I was gonna ask what it
We're
was
talking about a
today.
shit ton of money here.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, this isn't
wow.
this is not chump change. Meanwhile, Jane has woken up from being knocked out by that chloroform. And after getting out of the bindings Chris and Ruth had tied around her hands and feet, she first called the police and then she called Barbara's boyfriend, Stuart Hunt Woodward, to make sure he was okay and had not
Yeah.
indeed been in a serious car accident, as the kidnappers had alleged. He had not.
Okay,
Stuart then called Barbara's father, Jane's husband, Robert Sr., and notified him of the situation. Robert told Stuart, "Get off the phone. Why are you talking to me? Get off the phone. I want you to call the fucking FBI," which he did, while Robert, who had been away for work, returned to the Coral Gables family home.
good. Okay.
The next morning, Wednesday, December 18th, Barbara has now been buried alive for a day in complete fucking darkness. At 9 a.m., Chris called the Mackle home and instructed Robert to follow a set of directions that would lead him to the ransom note they had previously hidden on his property. I'm not sure
Wow.
why, but this detail really creeps me out. Isn't that creepy? It just,
That is very, yeah.
I mean, like Barbara's in a box, buried alive. I know that something being buried on the property in it ahead of time is like not a big deal, but for whatever reason, that just detail just creeps me out. Christ and Ruth had buried the ransom note in a glass jar in the ground at the base of a tree on the Mackle property. Robert learned that he was to gather $500,000 in $20 bills that were old and non sequential and put the money in a suitcase for the eventual ransom drop. The ransom note also gave Robert details on where Barbara was being held. Not the location, but gave him details on what happened to Barbara. So this was the
Mm.
first time anyone in the family learned of what had happened to her, that she was being held captive underground in this box.
Wow.
I'm sure, I'm thinking as a parent, I'm sure there was immense relief knowing that she was alive, but learning that your child had been buried alive, and the only people that know where she is are the kidnappers, the fuckers you're supposed to pay $500,000 to get her back.
Yeah.
Once the money was in hand,
Mm.
Robert was to take out a personal ad in the Miami Herald newspaper, because it's, 1968, that said, quote, "Loved one, please come home. We will pay all expenses and meet you anywhere at any time. Your family." That was the ad he was supposed to take out. This would be Chris and Ruth's indication that not only was Robert willing to pay the ransom, but that he had collected the money and was ready to make the drop.
Wow.
A few days after placing the ad, Robert received an envelope that had been mailed to the family home. Inside this envelope were two items: a piece of jewelry Barbara was known to wear, as well as that Polaroid photo of her holding the kidnapped sign as a proof of life photo. Meanwhile, what Chris didn't know was that while the Mackle family was certainly incredibly wealthy, they were also incredibly connected. All three Mackle brothers, Robert, Elliot, Frank Jr., were personal friends with Florida Senator at the time, George Smathers, as well as some guy named President elect Richard Nixon.
Mm, that
The
guy.
Mackles had a lot of powerful friends behind them. President elect Nixon asked J. Edgar Hoover to take personal charge of the FBI effort to recover Barbara, while George Smathers, the Florida senator, coordinated the information supplied to the Florida State Police. They were all like, "What do you need? We've got your back." The drop instructions to Robert were clear: take the suitcase of money and leave it at a very specific spot along Biscayne Bay in the early morning hours of a specific date. Do it alone. Leave immediately after dropping the suitcase. Don't try to cause any trouble, basically. And Robert
Right. Yeah.
followed the instructions to the letter, but the drop failed. There had been a rash of break ins in the surrounding neighborhood in previous weeks. Most residents were hyper aware of anything that may have seemed out of the ordinary.
Mm.
A neighbor that lived close to the drop location heard unusual noises early that morning, and concerned it might be another robbery, she phoned the police. When police rolled by to check up on things, they saw two people walking out of the nearby woods carrying a suitcase and another bag. What timing, huh?
Right.
Chris and Ruth saw them. They saw Chris and Ruth, who dropped the suitcase and the other bag, which they later learned held scuba equipment, and fled, abandoning the money, the scuba equipment, their blue Volvo, a boat they had stolen. They abandoned it all and just fled.
Wow.
So the police were like, let's check this out.
Weird.
So while they were investigating the car, the blue Volvo, they found many items that told them who they were dealing with. This was when the investigation and the situation switched. They found Ruth's passport. Whoops. They found checkbooks that belonged to Ruth and a checkbook that belonged to Chris. Papers that had their Miami address, that of the trailer park that they lived in Miami, papers that had their address on it, and lacy bikini underwear and
Ooh.
racy, extraordinarily nude photos of both Christ and Ruth.
Mm. Yum.
And the last thing they found was one of those Polaroid photographs of Barbara holding the kidnap sign. It was like
Wow.
this gigantic neon sign saying, "We're the ones that did
Yeah.
this. Come find
'Twas
us."
us.
So
Wow.
now they had the names and
Idiots.
identities of the two kidnappers. And as they started to investigate everything, they also put together that Judge Deacon was an alias for Gary Stephen Christ.
Mm.
And also, Christ and Ruth. Have you ever heard of Ruth Christ's Steakhouse?
Yes.
Yeah.
This is all
Don't you
throwing me off a little bit.
Thank you.
Yes.
And but that's why I'm not putting Ruth first.
Yeah. I've
When I
thought
say
of
their names,
Ruth's
Ruth
Chris
Christ.
multiple times. Yeah.
When
My
Robert
wait.
and Jane learned the ransom drop wasn't successful, they were so concerned the kidnappers would think that they had something to do with it that they took out another personal ad in every single fucking Miami area newspaper, letting the kidnappers know that they had nothing to do with the botched transaction and please don't take it out on their daughter Barbara. They were so
Wow.
worried about her safety and that they were doing
Yeah.
everything they could to keep her alive long enough to find her.
Right. Yeah. Ugh.
Christ and Ruth decided to split up and reconnect in Austin, Texas before traveling to Europe to commence their amazing plan that they have. Ruth hopped on a bus and headed out of town while Christ hung back, putting together a second ransom drop. This time, the plan worked. He instructed Robert to drop the suitcase at a specific location on the outskirts of the city. Christ retrieved the suitcase and, after determining that his best escape would be by boat through the canals that snaked across Florida, skip across the Gulf of Mexico, eventually leaving the boat and getting to the rendezvous point in Austin, Texas, that's what he decided to do. Super simple, brilliant.
Oh,
N-
easy
None of
peasy.
this has been over engineered, might I add.
No. No.
Chris just needed a boat,
That's it.
which was easy to purchase using the ransom money he had. So he went to some marine shop and he's like, "Hey, can I buy a boat?" And the guy's like, "Yeah, you can buy a boat. You got money?" He's like, "Yeah, I got
Sure.
money." So he buys a boat and he pays like $2,300 for this boat, which is a lot of money in today's money, like whatever
Yeah.
that is. He paid it all in cash, all in 20s. Okay. So now he's got his boat, he's got his money, he's got his plan. Except he hadn't planned on the owner of the marine boat shop being suspicious that some dude he's never seen before randomly walks into his shop to buy a boat with cash, all in 20s, when the news of the kidnapping and the ransom was the talk of the town.
Hmm. Gary.
He let Chris leave the lot with the boat he had just purchased under the name Arthur Horowitz. So he let him leave and he immediately contacted the police. The owner of the
Good.
marine shop did and was like, "Hey, I got this Arthur Horowitz who just bought this boat in cash in 20s. It seems sus. You might want to check it out."
Yeah. Well, good for him.
Meanwhile, Barbara is still buried. 15 fucking hours. 15 hours after the second ransom drop, Christ finally called the FBI, the Atlanta FBI Bureau, from a payphone and left directions with an FBI agent manning the switchboard. Remember switchboards? This is
Hmm.
seriously 1968. Like,
Yeah.
corporate accounts payable, Nina speaking. Just a moment.
Mhm.
Anyway, so he called the Atlanta FBI from a payphone and left directions with an FBI agent manning the switchboard as to where Barbara could be found. No one knew if she was still alive. Honestly, he didn't even know if she was still alive because he was supposed to be checking on her every 2 hours and didn't. And she's
Yeah.
been unsupervised for 3 days, buried in this box underground.
Whew.
A swarm of agents descended on the area where Barbara was allegedly buried. Shockingly, Christ's directions were a smidge vague, so they weren't really sure where to find her. And also, when you're in the woods, everything looks the same.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
really hard. Like this one tree, yeah, they all look like fucking same trees. Like, what tree are you
Yeah.
talking about? So they just started digging. There was like over 100 agents. They just all started pick a spot and dig. Well, with all those people out there and digging and talking and making noise, Barbara heard them. She heard them. She was still alive. She heard the noises they were making and she started screaming like her fucking life depended on it. Because it kind of did.
Wow.
The agents heard her, and after frantically digging, they were able to get to the box, pry the lid open, and free her from it.
Oh my God. I mean, I knew that was happening. I knew this was a survival story, but I have been nervous. I about had to go shit in a bucket.
Don't tip it over. She had been buried for 83 hours.
Oh my God.
That's three
In pitch
plus
black, except
pitch
for 3
black.
hours of that.
In her book, 83 Hours Till Dawn, Barbara reflected on what was going through her mind when she was in the box. Quote, "This is where I'm going to die. 3 of 4 times I thought this is going to be my casket. And when I got morbid, I would think of who would find me, who and when and how. Maybe it would be a farmer, or maybe someone building something in 10 years, 20 years. I wondered what I would look like and whether or not they could identify me. I was hoping that mom and dad wouldn't be alive when they found me because I wouldn't want them to think that was the way it was."
Man.
Barbara was safe, and for all intents and purposes, she was unharmed, though she was quite dehydrated, stiff, and she had lost 10 fucking pounds.
Wow. That's going to be my wedding diet. I need you to bury me in the yard.
Done. I will grab my shovel. She was cold and wet because rainwater had started to seep into the box and it was beginning to pool around her. So if it had been much longer,
Right.
she was too weak
Oh
to
my
walk
God.
without assistance, but she was alive. Shortly after she was rescued, she got cleaned up. She gave an 80-second press conference. Basically, she was like, the kidnappers treated me humanely. They actually didn't really harm me, theoretically speaking, and I'm doing great. And then she flew back to Miami on her father's private jet, as one does. She
What a
deserved that,
180.
as far as I'm
Yeah,
concerned.
yeah, but it's just so funny. Like, who gets
Yeah.
to be like, I was in a box for 83 hours. Back to my luxury life.
Yes. Can you please feed me grapes? 2 days later, on December 22nd, 1968, the FBI captured Christ.
Oh, good.
He had a briefcase with him containing about $18,000, which in today's dollars was a little over $165,000, just in 20s. I don't know
just
about
a briefcase.
That's a lot of fucking 20s. That's a lot of money, and it's heavy.
Really?
And he's like fucking like rocking around with this shit. They also found $480,000 in the suitcase, which in today's dollars is about 4.3 million. This is just bonkers. He was arrested, he was convicted, and he was sentenced to life in prison in 1969. Most people believe that he escaped the death penalty because Barbara spoke at the trial, and basically she's such a kind person. She's like, look, they didn't hurt me.
Wait, you can get the death sentence for kidnapping?
I don't know. Attempted murder, at least.
Well, yeah. I didn't know that you could get the death penalty for that, but that's wow.
I don't know. I don't know that in today's environment.
Yeah, true.
But I don't know about 1968, or in this case, 1969. So he got sentenced to life in prison, but not without parole. He was sentenced to life with parole, opportunity for parole. He served 10 years of his life sentence before being paroled in 1979. I don't think 10 years is enough, but...
No, I don't either.
And then he went on to become a doctor.
What?
He was able to get a license to practice in the state of Indiana in 2001.
No,
he went to school.
Thank you.
Yeah, he went to school out of the country and eventually got his medical degree and tried to practice in Alabama. They were like, fuck you. And so he went to Indiana And they were like, sure, we'll let you practice. There's going to be a lot of stipulations, but we'll let you practice.
We heart attempted murderers as doctor. What? How can you be a doctor with a criminal record for violent offenses?
I don't know.
Whoa.
It's like counter to the Hippocratic Oath, just in general.
Yes.
Your job is to protect and
Do no
help people.
fucking harm.
In 2003, his license to practice medicine was revoked due to not disclosing an unidentified disciplinary action he had previously received. Well, I dug in a little bit, and essentially, what was happening was he was being highly inappropriate with patients. For example,
Great.
he had a 13-year-old patient, a young lady. This 13-year-old patient had an eating disorder. I don't know if she was anorexic or bulimic, but she had an eating disorder that's not good. And he told her she had a big butt. Apparently, he don't like big butts and cannot lie.
Yeah, I can't lie either, and I will say that I hate this motherfucker.
He told a
Truth.
woman who tested positive for HIV that her boyfriend must be thrilled. One patient complained that Chris told her she had big boobs during a breast exam.
What the Can someone put him in a box, please?
Another complained of a sore throat and said Chris gave her a neck massage and a back rub. Is that gross?
He's icky. I don't like him.
Yeah. Even other medical students complained about the way he interacted with patients, saying he put his feet up on furniture, played with a deck of cards, and made inappropriate sexual comments. So, because he failed to disclose these disciplinary actions, his license to practice medicine was revoked in 2003.
Good.
In 2006, he was arrested for drug smuggling, for real this time, 30 pounds of cocaine. He was smuggling it into the United States by boat and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He was paroled in 2010 after serving like 3 to 4 years. There's conflicting reports on how much time he actually served, but he didn't serve all 5. In 2012, his early release was revoked for violating his parole because he left the country without permission. And that caused him to be sentenced to another 3.5 years in prison. He's a shady motherfucker.
Yeah.
Allegedly, he is still alive in his 70s, residing somewhere in either Georgia or Florida. He was never remorseful. He pled not guilty to Barbara's situation. He was arrogant and he was not sorry for what he had done. 79 days after Barbara's kidnapping, Ruth was finally captured by authorities in Norman, Oklahoma, after applying for a job. She applied for a job that required her to be fingerprinted. She allowed herself to be fingerprinted and it flagged. So
Wow.
they went and picked her up. She was returned to Georgia to stand trial, where she was tried and convicted to 7 years in jail for her part in aiding and abetting the kidnapping and ransom plot of Barbara Jane Mackle. She was fucking
Wow.
remorseful. And
Really?
she pled guilty immediately for the role that she played in Barbara's situation and abduction. She served 3 years of her sentence before being paroled, and she was immediately deported back to Honduras.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It is alleged she eventually got married and she's basically melted into the background. I have no idea if she's still alive,
Hmm.
if she's ever come back to the United States, if she had children, I don't know. But
Hmm.
she basically went into obscurity,
Right. Okay.
like a normal, if you will.
Right. Yeah.
Barbara and Stuart Hunt Woodward went on to get married a year later in 1970.
Aw.
They had 2 children and they remained married for 43 years until Stuart's death in 2013.
Wow.
Today, Barbara is around 77 years old and lives a quiet life in Florida. Aside from that 80-second press conference she gave after being rescued and the book she wrote about her ordeal in 1971, she has otherwise never spoken publicly about her kidnapping and has refused all interview requests. She
Good
just
for
wants to live
her.
a normal life and be left alone.
Yeah. She's like, look, I got the means. I don't need the money. I don't need the fame. I just
Exactly.
want to live my fucking life. Good for her.
Yep. Raise my family, be around the people
Yeah.
that I love, do the things that
Yeah.
bring me joy. That is the survival tale of Barbara Jane Mackle. It's fucking bonkers. It's
Wow.
wild. And for anyone that's interested in learning more about this case, there is a ton of fucking information out there about Gary Stephen Christ. He wrote a goddamn book.
Ew.
He has done and tried to do so much. There's a lot of information out there. He's very vocal and likes the attention, which is why I intentionally did not go to any of that. So if you're interested, there's a bunch more information out there about Christ, but I think he's a piece of fucking shit. And I don't want to give him
He
any more
is.
airtime than needed
Is his
to
book
really
called
tell the
I'm a
story.
Fucking Turd?
I didn't even bother to write down what his book name was,
Well, that's what it
but
should be called.
yeah. But I had never heard of this case, but I had seen the photograph of her holding the kidnapped sign. I have seen that photograph before, but I never knew what it was from.
When you mentioned it, I was like, I'm going to look that up because I wonder if it'll like trigger something. But yeah, none of the names I recognize. I don't recognize the
Yeah.
case,
Yeah,
nothing.
which is
So,
interesting because there's books about this case. There are fucking podcasts galore about this case. Discovery ID has some fucking show about this case. Like,
huh.
there's movies about this case, yet it's not all that well known.
Hmm.
So, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Crime Will Tell. Check out our new website, crimewilltellpod.com. Hit that subscribe button for our channel on YouTube. And if you're feeling so inclined, leave a rating and a review wherever you get your podcasts. 5-star ratings we prefer, but if you have
Right.
constructive feedback, we'll hear that too.
Yeah.
But yeah, with that, bye, Jamie.
Goodbye, Carrie. You did it. You really did it, champ.
I have skills.
Excuse me for my coughs. I need a lozenge.
It's pretty hot.
I can hear you.
I'm not a fan of that either.
I love it.
Oh, sorry.
Anyway, sorry, I'm fucking stupid. Go on.
I'll cut that out.